What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the lovely world of ArcheAge, and today I wanted to talk to you about Skullknight. Skullknight is my choice of class for ArcheAge. It's something I've played ever since the alpha. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. It's got a lot of strengths, got some weaknesses, but overall it's a very fun and effective build. Skullknight is Defense, Occultism, Oromancy. Bring up my skills here real quick. Defense, Occultism, Oromancy. Very tanky build. Defense and Oromancy are sort of the two tanking trees, making you very defensive. And then Occultism has a lot of really good group utility damage abilities, some tankiness as well through debuffs, and so on. So there's a lot of synergy between these three trees, which we'll go over here in a little bit. I kind of want to get out of the way the sort of weaknesses of Skullknight and its intent. Skullknight does not have a lot of maneuverability. The most maneuverability you're really going to get out of it is the Blink from Oromancy and Comet's Boon, which allows you to get a quick boost of move speed. Not really much else by way of maneuverability. Maneuverability is much more important in 1v1 or 2v2 sort of small scale PvP. It's significantly less important or impactful to not have it in large group PvP, open seas, pirating, all that kind of stuff. The actual mobility you have is not going to come into play as a weakness nearly as much, and that's truly where this build shines, is in group PvP, even the 5v5 arena. But yeah, open world group PvP, whether you're on Friedrich, you're doing just general, I don't know, honor farming, or in Hasla, or wherever you are, this build shines as a PvP tank and initiator. I'll go over the specific combos for those situations when I get to my actual open world PvP spec eventually. But that's really where the build excels. 1v1 is not its strong suit. The build can do okay in arena. It has some matchups that are nearly unwinnable. Just going to tell you straight out that the archery builds, which are very powerful in the current metagame, pretty much are a hard counter to Skullknight. There's nothing much I can do. Though I have a few tricks up my sleeve to try to make that matchup a little bit more even. Something that I'm kind of working on. So I want to do a quick rundown of the three trees and sort of their individual benefits, and then go over a little bit of their synergy. I'll talk more about the specific synergies when I get to the point where I'm talking about a few of the different spec choices that I actually have. So Defense. Defense is a very powerful tree right now. It's got a really nice CC chain for single target. Some excellent defensive buffs, including Redoubt, which is huge, gives you a monstrous block rate chance, as well as push and knockdown immunity. Pretty much every build of Skullknight that I take has Redoubt, because it's just really good. And believe it or not, most of the damage you're going to get because of Occultism's relative weakness right now is going to come from Boastful Roar in 1v1 situations. This ability, especially if you decide to combine it with Shrug It Off, can do a phenomenal amount of damage, and it's really a pretty amazing tool to suddenly burst down. The overall damage of Skullknight is more sustained than bursty, but you can really catch a lot of people off guard, even if they know your defense, by using a Boastful Roar, especially if you're lucky enough to crit with it. Invincibility is always a good choice. You're a PvP tank, and if you're the only one out there taking damage, popping invincibility guarantees 12 seconds for healers to top you off, and for any misguided DPS on the enemy side to make the mistake of trying to attack you, because it's not going to do anything. Imprison has a lot of utility, whether it's group PvP, the arena, 1v1 or 2v2 situations in the open world. It's good for ganking, counter ganking, tons of utility. I'm not going to go over every single scenario of what can arise when you're playing a Skullknight, but just understand that Imprison is a really good utility. And the passives are pretty amazing. High block rate, boost to physical defense, which you're going to need, extra life. You even have the option to reduce cooldowns, reduce some CC duration. Tons of stuff available in the defense tree. Very powerful tree. I'm going to move on to Occultism. Occultism on paper is an excellent tree. It's got a lot of utility damage. You have like a life drain, you have a damage reflection shield, an AoE silence, an AoE impale, essentially a stun, sustainable debuff with mana stars, one of the best level 50 talents in my opinion in the game, which is Summon Wraith, good for both PvP and PvE, and a slew of really powerful crit and crit chance and mana regen passives. You're likely not going to be able to afford the passives, unfortunately, but a lot of the utility presented here, I mean, just the Hell Spear into Summon Crows combo is excellent. Summon Wraith, which I don't have right now, is really, really good in groups. Yeah, not much I can say about this tree. It's got a lot of stuff that's good on paper, but the problem is that it doesn't provide you much damage. Just right now, with the current patch, the damage of Occultism is very low compared to a lot of the other trees. So, and that's actually really the primary weakness of Skullknight, is its damage output, which is mostly noticed in 1v1, 2v2 situations. If my damage was higher, if Occultism gets a buff, my ability to win fights in the arena goes up drastically. There's still a bunch of, you know, almost always going to lose type matches, but the reality is that Occultism's damage is kind of low, and I believe it's going to be adjusted later, but even if it's not really a tree I would move away from. The utility provided for it just really suits my playstyle and is overall just very solid. So we're going to go ahead and switch over to looking at Auramancy here. Auramancy has a plethora of excellent things you can use. Thwart, nice utility debuff for some situations, better in PvE in a lot of situations than PvP. Yeah, you have Conversion Shield, nice boost to magic defense. Vicious Implosion, one of the best group utility spells I think in the game. Really allows you to properly do your job. Shrug It Off, of course, stun and impale immunity and removal for 4 seconds. Including a magic damage taken decrease as well, so very good at as an anti-mage tank. Liberation, immunity to shackle and silence, 2 very annoying debuffs to have on you. Of course, the actual teleport, your only source of mobility, and some reasonably tanky and good utility, and some even some damage passives available in the Auramancy tree. Despite the fact that I think Auramancy is one of, if maybe not the most powerful, just in terms of raw power trees in this suite, I actually end up with fewer points in Auramancy generally than most of the other trees, because the stuff that I need is sort of cherry-picked out of here. Skullknight in general does not have too many actual combos in terms of, like, you know, abilities that chain into each other, but the ones that it does have, for example, Shrug It Off into Boastful Roar, if you need a bunch of damage, into Crippling Mire, is a very nasty combination. You know, even simple stuff like Hell Spear into Summon Crows, Shield Slam into Bull Rush. The combos that it does have are pretty good. But the actual synergy between the trees, even if it's not on paper combinations, it's quite excellent. It really is very good. I'll go over a little bit more of the synergies when I get into the individual spec sort of breakdowns, but there's definitely a ton of synergy between these 3 trees. And that was really the big thing that drew me to this particular spec, was the ridiculous amount of synergy, especially in group PvP, that it provides. One of the problems / benefits of Skullknight is because the 3 trees work so well, it's a very point-hungry build. Every single point you put in has to be something that's going to give you a lot of mileage. In particular, when we get the expansion to go up to level 55 as our level cap and get 5 more points, that's going to drastically improve an already powerful build, because there are easily 5 more points I could spend no matter what my goals are, whether it's PvE, you know, open world PvP, 1v1 arena, 5v5 arena, whatever my spec is, I could very easily fit in 5 more points. Whether it's more damage passives from Occultism, which I usually skip over, you know, more utility from any of the trees. It's all good stuff, and you know, we can use every single point that we get. So whatever your spec is for Skullknight, make sure every point you put into it is doing something very useful for you. So that's pretty much a quick rundown of all that sort of stuff. I'm going to go head over to the auction house to show you some of the gearing potential that you have. I don't actually have a lot of the gear that I would like, so I need to show you basically by looking at the auction house. So I'm going to head over there, and I'll be right back. Alright, I'm back here, right next to the auction house. I wanted to show you at least first the equipment that I do have that is proper. Your stat priority should be, despite the fact that I don't have as much, stamina is your big priority. You need as much stamina as you can get. That is most important to you. You are a tank first and foremost, and you are there to absorb damage and mitigate it properly. So the more health you have, the higher your defenses, the better of a tank you're going to be, just straight up. Both PvP and PvE, you need stamina. Secondary stats, Spirit is actually a little better than you might think. Intelligence is of course pretty decent. Intelligence does give you a little bit more leniency with your mana pool, a little bit more magic attack, the accuracy, the evasion, the crit rates. Those are decent things to have. Spirit's actually a little bit better than you, again, might think. It was much better in the early alpha. It used to give 4 magic defense per point of Spirit, which was pretty phenomenal. But even the 1 magic defense is nice. The increased health and mana regen speed helps you sustain yourself over longer fights if you're you know, doing some other things. And the real big draw to Spirit is the increases all accuracy. You definitely want to make sure you're landing every single ability that you can, and you have abilities that are very important to you that are both physical and magical. For example, I'm pretty sure that Boastful Roar is technically a physical ability, as are Shield Slam and Bull Rush, and then pretty much, of course, all your spells are magic. So being able to pick up both of those accuracy stats is very nice. And then you know, the little trickle of magic defense that you get from it is it's okay. It's not going to amount to a ton, but it's really the accuracy of both stats, or both types of attacks, that really draws me to Spirit. So that's a little overview of the stats there. As far as the gearing goes, you're going to be using a scepter and shield. This is mandatory no matter what style of spec or whatever other gear choices you make for a Skullknight. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that you want to use a scepter and a shield. Scepter is really your only opportunity to get as much damage as you can. I'm lucky enough to have the one from GHA, which has a pretty decent amount of magic attack. The intelligence, you know, helps a little bit, but primarily it's the magic attack I'm looking for on my scepter. I need to do some damage to make my presence a little bit more threatening than it otherwise would be. So the highest magic attack you can get is most important. The other stats are icing on the cake as far as I'm concerned. Similar idea with the shield. Because I use cloth with my set, I need every little last scrap of physical defense I can get, so you should go for the highest physical defense shield you can get. I haven't had a chance to sit down and grind out the Hassla shield. I've debated getting the PvP shield. For now I'm just using this sort of mediocre one from questing. Doesn't have the stats that I want on it, but you know, it's not too bad. It gets the job done, and if I could get more physical defense, that'd be great, but I can't yet, so we'll work on that eventually. Your bow and your musical instrument should be anything that gives you proper stats. I haven't had a chance to get a good bow to give me stats that I actually care about, but that'll be something I'll do eventually. And the quested flute from GHA is pretty solid for this build. 27 stamina, 18 spirit. It's, I think, just about as good as the loot you can get from Hassla grinding, and it'll save you a hell of a lot of time. So I say just get this and forget about it. It's just going to be a few extra stats, nothing too game-breaking. As far as your actual armor goes, I'm just using the quested stuff right now, the Wandering Scholar set. Nothing too fancy. I will be switching over to one of 2 sets here soon, which I'll talk about when I get over to the auction house itself. But you know, it gets the job done for now. And then your accessories are kind of up to you. There's a number of different types of accessories out there. I prefer the earth suffixed accessories, giving you a little bit more stamina and some more magic defense. In my mind, you cannot have enough defense. Magic defense, physical defense, both of them should be as high as possible to increase your overall mitigation while you're fighting. So let me move over here to the old auctioneer, and I'll take a look at some of the sets that you have choices between. In my mind, there's really only 2 sets that work very well for Skullknight. One of them is the stone set in cloth. Here's the set bonuses. Of course, it's going to be better if you have higher quality of stone sets, but the stone set gives you the standard cloth things, which is defense, magic defense. You also get stamina and spirit. So those are 2 very acceptable stats, but the set bonuses are really where the stone set shines. Increased physical defense is going to help you round out your defenses significantly more, since you are, again, wearing cloth. And then the overall decreased received damage boost that you'll get from the 7-piece set bonus is excellent. If you want to use plate, in my mind, you only have one choice there, and that is the Lake set. Lake is a sort of hybrid tanky slash damage set. It's for a slightly more offensive-minded Skullknight. My overall problem with plate is that you basically tank your magic resistance, which I'll talk about here a little bit more, but this has stamina, intelligence, which is good, nice little small boost to magic health, and then a boost to magic attack. So again, a little bit more offensively minded. I know some Skullknights prefer the plate. It definitely has some situations. I mean, for example, if you're tanking in PvE, you most definitely want to use a plate set. Get yourself a cheap set of either Illustrious Lake or you know, you can get the GHA plate set and just use that. It's fine. It doesn't have a lot of caster stats, but really all you need out of a set for PvE tanking, at least in terms of GHA, is you know, just the physical defense and the extra stamina. So not really a big deal. The overall differences that I've noticed between plate and cloth, and really one of the primary reasons that I really like cloth, is the 7-piece innate set bonus. The decreased cast time is nice. If you look up in the upper left-hand corner, I'm mousing over it. Casting delay when hit, minus 50%. Increased magic damage, plus 5%. Those are acceptable bonuses, but really the decreased duration of debuffs by 30% is phenomenal. It makes it so much harder to chain CCU, especially in group PvP situations. Even if you're able to break free of a CC chain for a split second because of that bonus and get another defensive cooldown popped or have a chance to use your invincibility or whatever, it's going to go miles further than the plate boosts do. It's just really, really, really powerful. And because of the defensive passive here, 700 physical defense, because of your shield giving you physical defense, you're able to round out your physical defense to be quite respectable. If I actually had the stone set at a decent quality, a better shield, and a fully enchanted shield, I could very easily get my physical defense up to, I would say, probably 3,000 would be too unrealistic. So having a solid amount of mitigation for both physical and magical damage is going to make you so much better off. In addition, you can block physical attacks. You can't block magical attacks. So the block rates that you'll have if you get, you know, if you have your readout up here for the 38% block chance as well as your passives, you'll be carrying around a 60% block chance, which is pretty incredible for when it's relevant in big PvP skirmishes. So it's really important stuff to have that block chance to help you mitigate the physical damage you're going to be taking. So a combination of a decent physical defense, a good block rate, and a really good magic defense is going to make you overall very hard to kill in group PvP and even in one-on-one situations. That's pretty much all I have to say about the equipment. We're going to go ahead and move over to talking about a few spec ideas that I have, some of them that I'm used and some of them that I'm still testing, to give you an idea of sort of the broad range of what all is possible with Skullknight. Okay, so the first spec that I wanted to take a look at here is the one that I've already been showing off. This is a slightly experimental arena-focused spec. Skullknight's main problem, as I've mentioned, especially in arena, is mobility and damage. My overall damage output is just not great, and I think that's largely due to the fact that Occultism's overall damage output is not great. I don't see a lot of people running Occultism, and that's because you just really can't kill stuff very efficiently with it. Actually, just as a quick aside, since I forgot to mention it earlier, when you're leveling with Skullknight, you're going to want to level with plate. You need as much physical mitigation as you can, because pretty much every mob out there when you're leveling is going to do physical damage. So level with plate, quested plate, and staff. You don't need to use a shield while you're leveling. You'll have plenty of physical mitigation without that stuff, and you need every little last drop of damage you can get. In addition, you can't really get scepters until sort of endgame, so staff is the obvious choice. And then just grab as many damage passives as you can in Occultism, all the Occultism damage spells, and definitely Boastful Roar from defense, because the amount of damage that does, especially at early levels, is phenomenal. You can pretty much one-shot a lot of mobs with a fully stacked metal Boastful Roar. It's pretty incredible. Okay, so anyway, talking about my arena build here. When building this arena spec, I had to take into account a few different things. I had to remove some of the more group-focused abilities that I have, and I had to build up some more CC elements to allow me to chain my CC a little bit longer than I normally would. One of the greatest strengths of Skullknight is its ability to do insanely long CC chains, especially if you count in the fact that some of your abilities just don't allow other players to interact with you, whether it's the invincibility, imprison, or telekinesis. You can actually dictate the flow of battle for a very long time by chaining all of your abilities together properly. Just a few examples, and these are pretty much combos you're going to be using, some of them for a lot of your different builds. Shield Slam, 2.5 second stun into a 5.5 second silence slash trip, depending on depending on if you get the combo through or not. You can combo that into a Hell Spear, into Summon Crows, sleep right afterwards with Leech, hit them with Stillness. You can then shrug it off Boastful Roar into a Crippling Mire, stunning them for the duration, pretty much the entire duration of the channel. And then you could blink away and imprison to to leave them out of your area. Pop Invincibility after the Imprison goes, and then Telekinesis them after that's over. And then by then, some of your other abilities may be on cooldown. So if you really wanted to dictate the flow of battle, you have a potential to do it for nearly a minute, I would say, if you really properly time everything together. It's very frustrating for the enemy, and it may come off as cheesy, but you need every last little advantage you can get, especially in the arena, as a Skullknight. So a few of the choices I'm just going to highlight here real quick. Normally I wouldn't get Toughen, but the nice thing about Toughen is it helps me stack metal more quickly, which means that my Boastful Roars are going to be more powerful. In addition, it's another buff. There are a number of abilities in the game that remove buffs from you, and so buffering your buff removing, if that makes any sense, is actually a pretty smart decision. One of the other things to keep in mind is if you are doing extensive CC chains, use those opportunities to reapply your buffs. Get Readout up, get Liberation up, and reapply Toughen or Refreshment if they've been taken off of you. The defensive passives are pretty straightforward. 15% extra block after blocking is excellent. Lots of physical mitigation. 700 physical defense, pretty much mandatory if you're wearing cloth. The extra amount of health that you get from Bear's Vigor is quite nice. It's a nice little extra buffer. And then Ursine Roar is taken because a lot of your most powerful abilities in the arena are coming from defense. So throwing a point in here to get their cooldowns to be reduced quite a bit is very effective. Sort of the standard suite of occultism stuff here. Telekinesis might seem like an odd man out, because it's a little weird, but I'm experimenting with this as a way to actually essentially gap close against Primevals and Stone Arrows. It's been kind of shaky as far as its success, so I don't know if I'm going to stick with it, but it's a learning process for me and you both. No build's going to be perfect for every situation, so it's a matter of just picking what's important. The idea is that if I get within range by blinking of a Stone Arrow, I can cast Telekinesis, drag them to me, and then as the Telekinesis wears off, imprison. The matchup versus archers is very much unwinnable unless you get them imprisoned, in which case you almost can't lose. If they actually get into range of your CC chains, the fight's pretty much over. You'll be able to do much more damage than they will in a short amount of time, especially since a lot of the archery damage is reduced at close range, and you'll be in good shape. Another thing that I don't have in a lot of my other builds is Stillness. This is a great ability, but one that's kind of hard to fit in the way I play Skullknight. And then I also have Leech for an extra single target CC, which I don't even think I mentioned earlier in the CC chaining. So tons and tons of abilities here for the arena spec. And I'm going to go ahead and switch over and show you my sort of general world PvP, small-time ganking PvP build that's sort of a general use utility build for pretty much any situation you'll get into in PvP. Alright, this is my open world / general use PvP spec. I use this when I'm pirating on the open seas, hanging out at Freedick trying to get people, ganking people for trade packs. Not that I'd ever do that. Pretty much my general go-to spec for any given situation. A few notable differences here, of course: no Stillness, no Leech. Stillness in particular is one that I would love to fit in, but as I mentioned before, this build is very point hungry, and pretty much every point that you need, or that you put into the build, has to be doing everything you can. It hurts to lose an AoE silence, but at the end of the day, it's not quite, doesn't quite make the cut the way that I play the build. It doesn't quite get there. I've also taken a single damage passive. In group situations, you're almost always going to be getting crit by something, and so boosting your magical crit rate by 20% will give you a little bit more of a damage presence that will help you be more threatening in PvP situations. One thing I actually haven't tested yet, and I really want to try to figure out, is whether or not Boastful Roar works off of magical crit or physical crit, because when Boastful Roar crits, it does insane amounts of damage. I've done upwards of 7,000 or 8,000 damage on people at level 50 with Boastful Roar if it crits. It's phenomenal in terms of its damage output, and really the only big burst you actually have. Another thing that's kind of missing is Retribution. It's a very nice ability and can definitely deal a lot of damage to enemies, but in a lot of small-scale PvP, especially in the open seas, melee damage isn't really that much of a concern. There are definitely melee builds out there, but a large chunk of the damage you're going to be taking is from archers of any kind and mages of any kind. So I just elected not to get it. You could probably switch out Reprisal for Retribution, but I kind of prefer Reprisal over the two. To me, that's kind of the choice here, is Reprisal versus Retribution, and I'm currently running Reprisal. In Oromancy, we pick up Conversion Shield. You're already very tanky against magic damage, but it's really nice to have even more of that, especially if you're doing a big, large-scale PvP initiation where you're likely to be all of a sudden focused by 10 people. Further nearly halving all the damage you take after mitigation is going to be quite effective. Vicious Implosion is one of the most powerful abilities you can use as a Skull Knight. It allows you to do your initiation successfully. Generally, when you're initiating in PvP groups, you teleport in, or otherwise use a glider to get in. You Vicious Implosion, follow it up by Hell Spear, Summon Crows, and then if you've done your homework and you have your defensive buffs already up, you can start channeling a Summon Wraith. Summon Wraith is one of those abilities I think a lot of Skull Knights overlook because it's a channeled ability. Yes, you do lose your ability to block while you're summoning, using the Summon Wraith ability, but the amount of group damage that it does, and especially the debuffs that it do, greatly increase your mitigation effectively against targets near you. If you've never been on the receiving end of a Summon Wraith, go find a Skull Knight or anybody else that has occultism and duel them and just have them cast it and watch how ineffective you are largely by moving. It's very easy to get interrupted out of it, which is why it's important to have Liberation for Shackle and Silence immunity, to have Readout up for Push and Knockdown immunity, and then potentially you can even pop Shrug It Off to guarantee that you get at least a couple seconds of Summon Wraith. In any large-scale PvP fight, if I've been able to get off even half of a Summon Wraith channel, let alone the entire thing, the amount of disable that it provides is stunning. It is ridiculous, and your enemy or your DPS should be able to take advantage of the situation when people are either trying to get out of Summon Wraith or otherwise just suffering its effects, and help you clean up the enemies. A few defensive passives were taken in Oromancy here. 7% of received damage to health, just effectively a 7% damage reduction above and beyond all other mitigation. It's not a ton, but it definitely helps smooth things out a little bit, and same thing with Inspiration Cloak. Some builds will do a lot of very small cuts on you, especially archers doing their constant arrow spam, so a few procs of Inspiration Cloak can actually soak up quite a bit of damage. It's actually a pretty decent ability. One thing that I don't take in any of the builds is Protective Wings. I think it is a very strong ability and could probably fit into some PvE specs, but again, the build's just so point hungry, it's hard to just look at that and say, oh yeah, I'm going to take that. I've very carefully thought out my strategy, and if you disagree, that's perfectly fine. I'd love to hear what you think of my choices, but it just doesn't quite make the cut for me in PvP situations. So that's sort of my go-to PvP build. We'll go ahead and wrap up the video with a quick look at my PvE spec ideas, and yeah, I'll be right back in a minute with a respec. Okay, here's the take I have on PvE. There's a few choices that I could move around, but overall this is sort of the approach I would take. Defense, of course, is a very phenomenal PvE tanking choice. Filling it up with over half the points is pretty much a natural thing to do. Mocking Howl, of course, is picked up as it's a phenomenal AoE threat generation thing. You can optionally grab Shrug It Off. The amount of magic damage reduction can come into play a few times, and there are some trash pulls in some instances that will stun and impale you, but largely if you feel like you need the extra aggro, you can use Shrug It Off to greatly increase the amount of aggro generation you have with Mocking Howl, and then effectively also with Boastful Roar, because Boastful Roar will allow you to do a lot more damage if you're under the effects of Shrug It Off. Refreshment is still taken. Toughen is not. This is actually kind of a tough choice because even though Toughen is sort of a very slow trickle of health regen, in a PvE situation, especially for boss fights, it could effectively end up being more health benefit than refreshment. So if you can manage to squeak it in on your take of the build, you can go for it. I also pick up Olo's Hammer. I really like this as a supplement to the sort of initial CC chain you do. Usually you'll go in, you'll thwart, you'll vicious implosion, or mocking howl, either of them first. You can kind of combo it either way. So thwart, mocking howl, vicious implosion, all those work fine. If everything's already within your area, you can probably skip the vicious implosion, but if you need to actually pull the mobs to you first, it doesn't hurt to do it the opposite way. You'll still generate plenty of threat. And then I usually go Hell Spear into Summon Crows, and depending on how the fight's going, I'll then channel Summon Wraith, throwing in Olo's Hammer if I need it. That's sort of the general thing. You still have all your extra utility things. Crippling Mire combined with Boastful Roar is still very powerful. Alternatively, you could actually pick up Absorb Life Force instead. Some bosses will actually get the Shaken debuff here from Boastful Roar, which will significantly augment the amount of damage that you do with Absorb Life Force, or actually rather just give you more health with it. So that's an option. Depends on what kind of bosses you're fighting and you know what your style is for it. And then a few things that I didn't take. No damage passives. Your damage output is not necessary in PvE, really at all. You're there to disrupt the enemies and just be a PvE tank, more or less. Mobs don't really care how much damage you do as long as you're generating plenty of threat, which you will with Mocking Howl, Guardian, and all your other actual damage abilities. Also didn't quite have enough room to pick up Absorb Damage or Inspiration Cloak. If you find that you need more defense and you're not going to need the mobility provided by teleportation, go for it. This is just one particular take. In addition, one of the other options, if you really want to generate a lot more aggro, especially in your initial pull, is to grab Hearten. That allows you to stack 3 Inspire stacks on Thwart, making your Vicious Implosion significantly more damaging, especially if you've already taunted all the targets with Mocking Howl. So, lots of different potentials there. Not really too many of the other abilities are super great for PvE. You know, Imprison doesn't really have any benefit there. The damage passives, again, you're not really there to do damage. Again, there are some cases for Protective Wings. I've heard a lot of people will use Protective Wings on the third boss in GHA. I've never felt like I needed it. I would almost rather have Conversion Shield, to be honest, because if Conversion Shield's up, I'm still allowed to generate threat. If I'm sitting there channeling Protective Wings, it's not actually doing much for threat generation. Of course, the same applies to invincibility, but at least invincibility is actually genuine invincibility and not just protection from magic attacks. But the choice is yours. You've got plenty of options here. As I mentioned before, the biggest problem and sort of the best benefit of being a Skull Knight is that there are so many point choices that make sense. There's so much synergy between these 3 trees that you could argue, you can make a case for potentially a spec that's completely different than this one as being the best for PvE. This video is more to show you sort of my take on what Skull Knight has to offer and to sort of let you draw your own conclusions. So that's pretty much it for my guide on Skull Knights. If you have any questions or feel like I left anything out, feel free to comment in the section below there. This is Cilantro Gamer. I'm available at on Twitter at twitter.com/cilantrogamer, and my live stream is twitch.tv/cilantrogamer. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the world of ArcheAge.